creating a visual workplace in a multi-shift environment that locks in improvement. Presenting the session today is the founder and president of CTPM, Ross Kennedy. Since CTPM's establishment in 1996, Ross has developed an improvement methodology that is centered around progressively developing and engaging all personnel to identify problems at the earliest possible time, solve them to root cause, and share the learning. Over this time, Ross has become recognized as Australasia's leading authority on total productive maintenance and CTPM's Australasian TPM and lean approach to operational excellence. So with that being said, let's get started with today's session, and I'll now pass you over to Ross.
Thanks, Nelson, and welcome everyone to our last webinar for the year, number 82. So we've been doing a few of these. Thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully you'll get a little bit of value out of today's webinar, which has been, the topic has come from, again, feedback from those who have attended previous webinars. We've had visual workplaces come up a number of times. So I thought I'd just put a little twist to it and talk about it in a multi-shift environment, because there's certainly a lot of applications where people use visuals in a single shift environment, and you just got to get the people on that single shift all engaged. When you have a multi-shift situation, it becomes a little trickier, and we have to use a few more extra tools to support the sustainability of it, has been our learning. So I thought we'd just talk about getting agreement across the shifts, addressing the what's in it for me, taking a standardized approach, responding when visual controls are not followed, and then finally monitoring the effectiveness of your visual workplace. Visual controls have been around for a long time, and a lot of people use them. There's one example I saw on the webpage, which I thought was quite cute. For those of us who used to travel, we've done that for the last 12 months. At the airport, it's always a great place to see a lot of very effective visual controls around, so people know where to park planes, etc. In the workplace, we see visual controls or visual workplaces using visuals for notice boards, information boards, etc. Again, the tier 2 meeting using run charts here, but again, all different types of different boards and different visuals we see. Even on the equipment, we use in our TPM activities to identify problems at the earliest possible time. We get visuals put on gauges, nuts and bolts, etc. So there's certainly a lot of examples around there of visual workplaces, both in the community, from just traffic lights and street signs to what we see in the workplace. But I thought I'd just get you to think about something first. And again, this is something I use in our public training courses. I get people thinking about how do they train dolphins at SeaWorld, because most of us, I think, have seen dolphins perform at SeaWorld, and they do some tremendous tricks. And we all know that, yes, as they perform, they often get little treats given to them. So there's that recognition. But the key to it is that what we've found is that the key to it is what they call the rope. So when they first start training a dolphin, they lay a fat rope across the bottom of the pool, and they signal the dolphins, and they swim across the rope, they get a treat. Then they progressively raise the rope, so it's at water level, and then the dolphin again has to go over the rope, not under it, to get the treat. Then they raise the rope even higher and higher in the pool, so the dolphin has to do jumps like that before it is rewarded with this treat. And then when the show starts and everyone comes in, they take away the rope, and all we see is these great performing dolphins. That's a great little story about training a dolphin. But why do we talk about that? Well, when we visit best practice sites, for example, Toyota, it's just probably the most common one we talk about, we see the dolphins but not the rope. And what message we're trying to get there, especially in a visual workplace environment, is that we can go in and we can see some very good visual controls everywhere. But unless we know how they were developed, who implemented them, and how the workforce were involved in them, we don't understand why they are effective. So it's all very well to go and say, hey, this place has got great screens, we should have screens in our factory so we can pull this information up. But unless the people in the workplace have been involved, what we find is that people just walk past and don't look at the screens. And after 6 months, they turn them off because they don't see any value in them. Whereas at the best practice sites you go to, the screens are very, very effective. So I thought I'd just share that with you before we get into, okay, first point, getting agreement across shifts. Now, let's look at what we call a defined production area, which is simply where we have no inventory counting points between machines, so can only measure OE between input and output. In other words, like a bottling line or a packaging line or something like that, where you have certain machines going through. It might be a filler, a labeler, a packing, or it might be say a brewery. You might have a pasteurizer. Then you come out of that, and then you go into packaging. Then you go into the packaging goes into boxes, and then or 6 packs. Sorry, 12 packs. Sorry, I'll get this right. 24. We put 4 6s in to make a cluster pack, and then you feed it into the palletizer. So it could be something like that. And you might have operators at each workstation. Now, and you have a frontline leader, obviously. And again, our learning is that in a workplace, you don't want any more than a total crew of 8 or a frontline leader and 7 operators. But if that's your defined area, and if you have a 3-shift operation, what we suggest and what we've found to be most effective to get this agreement between shifts is to allocate each shift a improvement area. So 3-shift operation, 3 improvement areas. And the way you go about that is you divide the plane up. I've done that very simply here, but you'd get agreement between the 3 leaders for the shifts. So the leader of shift A, shift B, shift C would all say that's a fair and equitable way to, or the best way we can divide the place into improvement areas. Then what we do is pull it out of a hat as to see who gets which one. And then the idea behind it is when you're doing improvement, like identifying and installing visual guides, visual controls, creating a visual workplace. Shift A, for example, would look after the area that covers machine 1 and 2 and everything surrounding it. Shift B would do machines 3 and 4, and Shift C would do machines 5 and 6 area and the surrounding area as highlighted. The reason for doing this, first of all shifts get involved. If you want improvement to sustain and get agreement between shifts, they've all got to develop at the same time. So therefore, they're all going down the improvement path. And whether you're using a 5S or a work area management, in our case, type framework, they all get involved. And then what we do is we introduce a communication system between the shifts. Now, for those who have read The Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker, he talks about the Ringy decision making. Now, in the lean house, you'll see under people and teamwork, and I've highlighted in red, some of the tools or techniques they use is this concept of Ringy decision making. And it's a process used in Japanese organizations which ensure that all people who will be involved in implementing a decision have a say in making that decision in the first place. So if you're going to put a visual control in the workplace, all the people who work across all the shifts, you want them to get some involvement. Ringy is a collective decision-making process involving the circulation of a document. Now, we are certainly not great fans of Japanese language being used in improvement in the Australian workplace culture. So what we've done is taken that concept and said, yeah, pretty spot on. Let's turn it into something a little bit simpler and use our language to create the same consensus across shifts. So what we have here is what we call an improvement sheet, which is like a very, very simple problem-solving framework of six parts to it. So you define what the problem is. In this case, they had a cluttered and messy workbench. They wanted one that had good visual controls so people could keep everything neat and orderly. So this was actually B shift, and Graham Bailey is, you see the top left-hand corner, leader of the team. Jim Smith, one of the crew, came up with the idea, organised a sketch, and they created their improvement sheet, which saying this is what we propose to do and what we expect it to cost and how long before we want to do it. Then down at the bottom, you'll see provision for the leader of the other two shifts, Shift A and Shift C, to sign off on behalf of their crew. So in other words, have it on display, let the crew have a look at it. If we're all happy with it, we sign off on it. And then you have provision for the manager or the supervisor who can justify the expenditure or the improvement to sign off and say, go ahead. Then you now have a completed improvement sheet with a photo of what the final outcome was as a record of an improvement by the team. And again, where all the shifts agree with what's going on. And what you find is if all three shifts are involved in improvement, all three shifts are generating improvement sheets, and everyone starts using it as a common tool to get this agreement. Because I have seen in some workplaces where one shift comes along and says, hey, we need to, for example, put a bracket on the wall to hang a hose on, so it's always there when we want it. And night shift comes along and says, hey, that's in the way of what we do, and they cut it off and it goes in the bin. And then the A shift crew get really upset, and then they won't communicate, and everyone blames everyone else. So this is a way of getting that level agreement across all shifts. Very, very important. Addressing the what's in it for me, the role of what we call emotive questioning to create a pull culture. So if you want to get your people engaged to follow visual controls in the workplace, creating a visual workplace, you've got to get them, you've got to pull them into it. And what we've found is that the Australasian workforce is very much driven by what's in it for me, and therefore we've got to highlight what's in it for me. And the best way to do that is using emotive questioning. For example, do you ever waste time trying to find something when you're about to do a task? Do you ever find other people not putting things back where you can find them? Do you have an example where you've gone to get something but it wasn't where you expected to find it? And when people start talking about their experiences with their frustrations, you lock them in to say, well, let's start sorting this out in your improvement area. What can you do about it? And let's get all the other shifts to agree. If these issues were addressed, would your work area be a better place to work in? If everything was at your fingertips, would your job be easier? This is the way you engage your workforce rather than just have the manager come along and say, hey, we're going to put visual controls everywhere, we're going to put new standards, we're going to mark the floor up, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And you push it on to people and they go, yeah, that's fine, you do it all, we won't follow it, that play doesn't suit us, and you don't get very good buy-in. Taking a standard approach. Well, a standard is simply a desired outcome or desired requirement. Shows what you expect to see, supported by visual controls in the workplace. So here's what we call work area management standard. Now, it's developing what template that best suits our site. This is one example of a template where it shows what the standard should be and what an example of what it's not. Another way of doing that is just simply having the standard itself. You don't worry about the not the standard. I think it becomes pretty obvious to people, if they've had ownership, if they've been involved with it, to go and say, yep, that's what it's got to look like, and we can check to see whether it is being kept that way. So then you develop your standard for a standard, and then everyone, when they go and put a visual control in, you set up a standard for it and have it on the wall next to the workplace So anyone walking past can see whether everyone is complying or not. Because if you don't put the standards up, people can't pick up that maybe someone's not complying. So very important that you have standards for every visual control that you put in your workplace. Now, what happens if visual controls aren't being followed? Well, we talked about the improvement sheet being a tool to get agreement between shifts. Here's another example of an improvement sheet where they have gone and instead of having a box of tools in a cupboard, they've made it very visual. So they've identified exactly what tools they need for that work area, and they've put them on a simple shadow board. Doesn't have to be fancy and expensive. It was a pretty cheap solution, but it worked. So there it was. And they created a standard to say, this is what it should be like. And all the crew signed off on it saying, yes, we agreed to that standard. And we will understand why it is there so that whenever we need a specific tool, it's at our fingertips. And we put it back when we're not using it. So what happens if people don't put it back? What do we do about it? Well, what we introduced at this particular site is a thing called a work area management, because that's what we do, which is our enhanced version of 5S, compliance audit map. And the way that works is that you'll see on the right-hand side is the layout of the work area. And it's got 6 numbers on it, 6 points where they have instigated visual controls, visual workplace situations where, again, they expect people to have a standard there. They've got 6 standards of what they expect the workplace to look like. And the idea of the compliance audit is for the supervisor, before the end of the shift, typically we try to do it a couple of hours before the end of the shift, say once a week or whatever frequency is decided, but definitely weekly. Sometimes it might even be initially daily, to walk around, and it either complies to the standard or it doesn't. None of this scoring thing about 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 5, whatever. It's either yes or no. It complies or it doesn't. And you've got to be realistic about it when you go and look at a shadow board. That is the tool being used at the time, therefore it's not going to be on the board, and that's fine. But if it's not being used, it should be on the board, so to speak. So the supervisor goes around, does a very simple yes, no, and it is designed so that it's like a routing. They start at 1, and 1, 2, 3 is you follow around, so it's in sequence of finding things. So it's one quick walk around the workplace, which you want your supervisor to be doing on a regular basis anyway, and just going yes, and the standard is already in the workplace, so they can see it as they walk past, not relying on just a little diagram on their sheet of paper, the big diagrams on the wall. They can check straight away, go yes, no. And if there's any no's, the idea is the supervisor goes straight to the frontline leader, the production leading hand, for example, who's responsible for their crew and for training and developing their crew, and go to the leading hand and say, hey, you haven't got 100%. You got problems? Do you need help? If not, I'll come back in an hour's time or 2 hours time before the end of the shift, and we'll do it again. And we'd like to see 100%. And then it's up to the leading hand to go and talk to their crew and find out why they didn't get their 100% compliance, to reinforce. Right? And you keep doing that and keep doing that, and you'll gradually get this understanding and locking in the compliance. Because what we've learned is in the workplace, when you introduce a new visual control in the workplace, people have got their old habits. To change their habits is going to take, as the industrial psychologists tell us, about 21 repeats and 7 sleeps. So if you're doing this for a weekly basis compliance audit to reinforce people getting the new habits, you got to do it for 6 months minimum to have a solid impact. So that just shows you where it fits in. I thought I'd throw this slide in just to get us thinking. This is going out of our 2-day workshop. It's all about safety and TPM. Now, we're not talking about safety or TPM at the moment, we're talking about visual workplace. But the reason I do this is that it's all linked together, because when you look at the safety, and I think we've all seen the safety pyramid, on the left is saying for every lost time injury, there's going to be 29 medically treated ones, and you'll probably have 300 near misses. And we know that if there's a lost time injury, we can do it, play detective, analyse the root cause, stop it from happening again. We can do the same thing for medically treated. If we hear about near misses, we can do the same thing. However, we often don't hear about near misses. So therefore, we go and introduce hazard reduction in the workplace by doing safety walks, etc. Get rid of all the hazards. And that's where visuals come in really powerfully. And then it's a matter of changing the habits of our people. So I don't know if you've ever had a situation where someone, might have banged their finger with a hammer or something or other, or injured themselves, and you ask what happened, and they go, "Oh, I wasn't thinking." Right? It's a behaviour, so we've got to change the habits and behaviours. And we do the same thing with TPM. Is failures, inspectable accelerated deteriorations, like finding a hot bearing, one that's on the way out. That's inspectable accelerated deterioration. And equipment defects. Equipment defects are little things, looseness, contamination, bent, buckled, grease lines, etc. And often people don't see them. And it's a habit. You've got to change the habit. You've got to reinforce and reinforce. So it's all about this idea of recognising 21 repeats of reinforcing. And that's why that compliance audit is probably the most effective way of changing the behaviours in your workplace. And that's why when we get into other TPM activities, you do safety observation audits by the crew to their fellow crew people when they're doing, or we introduce it in operator equipment management activities to again start redeveloping new habits and behaviours of the workforce. So with that, I thought I'd make the final thought. And this is another really important one. Recognise the impact of ownership to introducing visual controls. And I've mentioned that as we go through. If people are involved in establishing the visual controls, they will use them. When they are introduced by other people, they are often ignored. Now, we run a simulation tool called the Big Loader during our public workshops. And it's just a little truck that runs around and drops little black balls into a chute, and it goes through a process, and you count how many balls and you measure OEE. But when you have this truck and a front end loader on it, you can put them either way around on the machine. If you have a crash and you've got to reset the thing up. And we've got visual controls on there. But because we put the visual controls on and no one in the audience knows about the visual controls, they don't go looking for them. Therefore, they don't use them and they totally ignore them. And that's exactly what happens in the workplace. If they've got no ownership to a visual control, that doesn't mean someone's got to put every visual control on to have ownership to it. If they're in the process of improvement, where you've got 3 improvement areas and 3 crews, and they're putting visual controls on in their improvement area, they're going to be very, very mindful and obvious of the visual controls being put on by the other crews. And therefore, they'll get that sense of ownership to them, because they'll just go out and compare their visual controls to the ones they've done, etc. But they're involved and engaged in it. So very, very important. You've got to get your people involved in the actual implementation of some of the visual controls, so that they can be aware of the visual controls and be told about the other ones through improvement sheets, etc. And a real good story I came across working over in New Zealand at the steelworks. They put in a new mill about 20 years ago. Japanese put the steel mill, rolling mill in, and the Japanese came along and put visual controls through everything, match marked every nut and bolt, and on the gauges, put all the marks and everything. No one at New Zealand Steel at the time knew anything about TPM or visual controls. So progressively over a period of 5 years, they went 5-10 years by the time we got invited there. Very few remnants of the visual controls, because most of them were being painted over, gauges had failed, new gauges had gone on, and no one knew what those funny marks were all about. And same when we did the TPM training, that you could see some people going, "Oh, that's what they were for. Oh, no one told us." So get your people involved. You're going to start putting visual controls anywhere. Okay, that's our half-hour quick little webinar. I hope it's given you a few things to think about in relation to visual workplace and visual management and visual controls. If there's any questions, more than happy to answer them. And Nelson will chair that question or comment session, or you can contact me or our head office at any time. We always love to have a chat. While we're waiting for any questions, just a quick reminder, we introduced our new accredited yellow belt online self-paced training course. So we've taken the 2-day workshop, public workshop, for obvious reasons, we can't be running those at the moment, and turned it into an accredited yellow belt self-paced training course. And you get material to go through at your own pace, and we have weekly tutorial webinars that people can come along to, and I did one this morning, which was a bit of fun, with quite a number of people from Yalumba Winery who are doing the course. We've also got a super special on at the moment. In January the 1st, we celebrate our 25 years. So I said to Nelson, for the first 25 people who enroll in the course, we'll give them a 50% discount. So if you're interested in it, there's no time frame of when you start or when you do, just the first 25 to register will get the 50% discount. And I think there's still a few places left under that offer. So, make sure any questions or comments, please.
Okay, thanks very much, Ross. As Ross mentioned, if you have any questions, please type in the question in the question pane on your control panel, and he'll be happy to answer them. And we don't have any questions at the moment, but as a reminder, a link to the recording of today's webinar will be provided in a follow-up email to you later today. So please feel free to share it with your colleagues or rewatch it again. It doesn't seem like we have any questions come through, Ross. So okay, I think we might.
I'll just wish everyone a very, very happy festive season and Christmas time and Happy New Year. And we all wish and pray that 2021 will be a better year than 2020.
Yes.
But everyone can stay safe and have a great Christmas. Back to you, Nelson.
Yes. So thanks everyone for attending. A feedback form will display on your screen after the session. So let us know how it went, and if you have any topic suggestions for our webinars in 2021. Thank you once again for attending. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a safe and Merry Christmas. Thank you.